This video is sponsored by Delete Me. It's April 1st, 2001, and Lieutenant Shane Osborn fights the yoke of his EP-3, the aircraft spiraling toward the South China Sea after a collision with a Chinese fighter. With the altimeter dropping rapidly past 12,000 feet, 23 Americans gripped their harnesses behind him. No one has ever successfully ejected from an EP-3. At this speed, they'd hit the tail. Even if they could, April means shark breeding season. Tiger sharks and great whites hunting in massive numbers. At 10,000 feet, the controls finally respond. With the aircraft leveled off, Osborn faces an impossible choice. The only runway within reach is on Hainan Island, on a Chinese military base. And inside his cabin are years of NSA intelligence. Every code, every frequency, every secret America held in the Pacific. Losing all of that unprotected classified data, codebooks, encryption devices, and target lists to the Chinese government was a nightmare scenario. With a failing aircraft, there was little the crew could do. In contrast, you can still protect your sensitive personal information before it's too late. Most people have no idea that their personal data, names, phone numbers, addresses, even relatives, are already being harvested and sold by data brokers. The way these people search sites is perfectly legal and incredibly dangerous. They create public-facing profiles from your private information, making you more vulnerable to phishing, scams, doxing, and even physical threats. That's why we at Dark Skies use Delete Me. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that removes your personal data from hundreds of data broker websites and actively keeps that information safe. After we signed up, our first privacy report showed dozens of listings, some going back years, that exposed the private contact details, full names, and addresses of some of our team members. Delete Me's experts handled the removals and continued scanning year-round to prevent that information from reappearing in people's search sites. We love that they don't outsource anything. All removals are handled in-house. Verify your data is exposed before taking action, so your info isn't spread even further. Have real privacy advisors you can talk to for special requests in complex cases. If you work online, share controversial topics, or just want to take your privacy seriously, we highly recommend you check them out. Get 20% off all consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/darkskies and using code DARKSKIES at checkout, or simply scan the QR code on screen. Don't wait for a digital crisis to realize how much of your own information is already out there. In the late 1940s, as General Mao Zedong, the founding leader of the People's Republic of China, and his forces took control of the mainland. Instead of supporting their World War II-era partner, America threw its support behind the nationalist government, which had fled toward the South Sea, finally regrouping on the island of Taiwan. With the Cold War evolving and the U.S. building strong alliances all across Asia, China began its own slow military awakening, heavily influenced by the Soviets, and most importantly, homegrown ambition. Through it all, both sides remained locked in a cautious standoff. Nowhere was this shift more visible than in the air, where the United States carried out signals intelligence flights near the Chinese coastline, especially around the South China Sea island of Hainan. The Chinese government declared no American president would accept that kind of surveillance off their own coast. Yet these once sporadic flights continued, rising from a few a week to nearly daily sorties by the 1990s. As the missions increased, so did the countermeasures. The Chinese pilots started flying closer and closer, appearing alongside the daredevil pilots and matching altitude, with some even signaling with their hands from the cockpit. While jets circled over the South China Sea, the already tense relationship hit another breaking point when in 1999, during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, an American-made precision-guided munition slammed into the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, sending flames tearing through the entire diplomatic building. Though Washington blamed outdated maps, Beijing did not accept that such an attack was a simple mistake. By the turn of the millennium, Washington was rebalancing. With the Soviet Union gone and the Gulf War over, upon taking office in January 2001, new American President George W. Bush and his administration made one thing clear: China would be treated less like a partner and more like a strategic competitor. With this, the slow, deliberate patrols flown by American aircraft collecting radar signatures, communication traffic, and electronic emissions in the South China Sea reached an all-time high. On Sunday, April 1st, 2001, Yet another surveillance mission launched from Kadena Air Base. This time, it was the turn of a 29-ton U.S. Navy Lockheed EP-3 Ares II aircraft. Despite its age, this lumbering spy plane from the 1960s was still a powerful intelligence asset when handled by the right crew. It could detect signals from hundreds of miles out, tracking radar pulses, intercepting voice traffic, and mapping China's electronic battlefield in real time. That morning, it was being flown by Lieutenant Shane Osborn, with co-pilot Jeff Vigneri beside him, plus 2 additional pilots who would rotate during the 9-hour mission. Behind them, in the narrow and windowless fuselage, Navy Lieutenant Marcia Sonan led the voice intercept team. A team of 18 linguists and eavesdroppers sat hunched over racks of gray machines, while John Comerford, the senior evaluator, oversaw the highly classified surveillance work. The EP-3 wasn't operating alone. It was part of the NSA's Pacific Surveillance Network, bunkers in Japan and South Korea, listening posts in Okinawa, even a World War II-era facility buried beneath a Hawaiian pineapple field. Satellites swept overhead every 90 minutes, while ground stations tracked every radar pulse and radio transmission. Shortly after takeoff, Osborn unbuckled from the pilot's seat and made his way back to the ops area, telling his 23-person crew the weather looked perfect. Miles upon miles of visibility stretched in every direction. Returning to the flight deck, he guided the EP-3 southwest at 21,500 feet, threading between Taiwan and the Philippines before turning to follow China's coastline past Hong Kong. There, the aircraft settled into its surveillance track, 60 miles off Hainan Island, by then one of China's most heavily defended military zones, with Lingshui Airfield at its core. With the engines droning barely past 200 miles per hour and autopilot engaged, the Sunday morning intercepts trickled in, sparse and predictable, with an occasional radar ping and routine military chatter. Unbeknownst to the crew, the Chinese were also listening, picking up every signal from the EP-3, tracking its movements, logging its transmissions, and preparing a plan of their own. As the American aircraft neared the coastline, at 8:48 a.m., a ping was sent to Lingshui Airfield. Within seconds, alarms pierced the morning air across the base. In the ready room, fighter pilots Wang Wei and Zhao Yu grabbed their helmets and raced for their single-seat J-82 Finback interceptors. Wang Wei was no stranger to the Americans. At only 33, he was one of the most aggressive interceptors in China's Southern Theater Command, with over 1,100 flight hours, many of these spent shadowing foreign surveillance aircraft. Bold and confident, Wang treated these intercepts like personal contests, flying dangerously close, once coming within 10 feet of an American plane. On another encounter in January, one U.S. crew swore he'd held up a sheet of paper with his email address written on it. Now, Wei and Yu were aboard their Finbacks, armed with Israeli Python air-to-air missiles. With their Mach 2.2 capability and improved avionics, briefly supplied by the U.S. during the short-lived 1980s cooperation program, they were climbing rapidly toward Osborn's lumbering and unarmed EP-3. 3 minutes later, the American aircraft's secure satellite link crackled with an urgent warning from the NSA's Pacific listening post. Chinese fighters were airborne and closing in fast. Soon, pilot Osborn caught sight of 2 dark specks gaining altitude, only about a half-mile out. Then, the fighters split their approach. One hung back, maintaining a half-mile buffer, while the other was accelerating straight toward their left wing. In the ops spaces, Lieutenant Marcia Sonan pressed her face against a small round observation window on the left side. There, she saw the approaching Finback growing larger by the second. As the commotion grew behind her, 6 of the operators also stopped their work and turned toward the window. The Chinese pilot was tucked in tight against their wing, close enough that Sonan could see the dark visor of Wei's helmet. Then her heart sank. She also saw the missiles hanging from his hardpoints. 40 feet became 30, then 20, then 10. There, the J-82's wings began to rock in the turbulence from the EP-3's engines. As the 2 aircraft swayed together in an unsteady formation, the Finback's nose pitched up slightly. Through the narrow gap between the models, Osborn could make out the Chinese pilot's features. Wang Wei then turned his head and raised his hand in what might have been a salute, or perhaps something else. Then his Finback dropped back about 100 feet off their left wing. Osborn watched him go, and with a cold feeling settling in his stomach, said, quote, This isn't good. A minute later, Wang Wei was back, this time pushing even closer, just 5 feet from their wingtip. He then held up what looked like a piece of paper against the canopy, but before anyone could make out what it said, the pilot peeled away again. On his third pass, Wang Wei's J-82 was now struggling badly. Built to slice through the sky at twice the speed of sound, the fighter wobbled, trying to match the EP-3's plodding 200 miles per hour, riding the edge of a stall. As he slipped directly beneath the EP-3's left wing, Wang Wei's panicked voice burst over the radio to Ling Shui. He was stuck in the American aircraft's vortex and couldn't break free. Seconds later, the J-82's tail section slammed into the EP-3's massive propeller, which sliced through the fighter's vertical stabilizer like tissue paper and sent the severed tail spinning off into space. Without its stabilizer, the finback pitched up violently. Its nose swooped upward and smashed into the spy plane's forward fuselage. Flying behind at a safer distance in the second J-82, Zhao Yu watched the entire collision unfold, frantically calling out to his friend on the radio. Wang Wei's damaged fighter held steady for 30 seconds, trailing smoke, then rolled right and dove toward the sea. Just then, a dark shape separated from the falling aircraft, and he could see his friend had successfully ejected. But the parachute deployed too late, streaming uselessly as both pilot and fighter vanished into the South China Sea, lost forever. Inside the EP-3, Osborn felt his whole world explode. The control yoke bucked wildly in his hands as the windscreen became a storm of debris. When the sheer impact sent the aircraft's fiberglass nose cone flying past the cockpit windows, the cabin pressure vanished with a violent whoosh, popping the crew's ears as papers whirled through the air. Then, with the nose smashed and the number 1 engine destroying itself, the damaged EP-3 lost all aerodynamic balance and flipped entirely upside down. The aircraft then entered an uncontrolled dive, and Osborn, trying as hard as he could to stay conscious, found himself looking up at the ocean through what was left of his windscreen, the blue-black waves now above him instead of below. The spy plane tumbled through the sky in its inverted dive. Osborn yanked the yoke hard right, stomping on the right rudder pedal, trying to break the spiral, but the dive only steepened. He watched the altimeter unwinding and was shocked to find they'd already fallen 1.5 miles. Over the PA system, he yelled, quote, "Prepare to bail out." In the ops area, the intelligence specialists scrambled for parachutes, survival vests, and helmets, fumbling with straps and buckles, their hands shaking from both nerves and the movement of the aircraft. Then, at 15,000 feet, the controls began to respond. Osborn, pulling the yoke harder, muscles straining, managed to bring the damaged aircraft back from the edge. Finally, at 8,000 feet, after falling nearly 3 miles, the EP-3 leveled out. At 9:13 a.m., only 8 minutes after the collision, co-pilot Jeff Vigneri grabbed the radio and dialed the international distress frequency. It was 8:13 p.m. in Washington, and the NSA, despite its vast network of satellites, listening posts, and intercept stations that could capture a whisper from anywhere on the planet, had never bothered to assign anyone the channel, and Vigneri's emergency call went unanswered. Osborn was presented with an impossible decision. He knew no one had ever successfully bailed out of an EP-3, and with the aircraft's damage, anyone jumping would likely slam into the tail section. Even if they somehow cleared the aircraft, 24 people would be scattered across miles of shark-infested waters. The life raft would drift far from any survivors at their current airspeed. However, ditching seemed even worse. With limited control and the bulbous radar dome protruding from the belly, the plane would nose straight down and sink within seconds of hitting water. That left the third and only option, Hainan Island, the very target they'd been surveilling. Surrounded by shredded consoles and scattered documents, Osborn made the call. Classified content or not, the 24 lives came first. The pilot then turned the aircraft toward Ling Shui Airfield and gave the order he hoped he'd never have to: begin emergency destruction protocols. The problem was, there were none. Despite flying these missions almost daily along hostile borders, there were no procedures, no training, and no concrete plan for what to do in an emergency if it was necessary to divert to the target country. With this realization, Lieutenant John Comerford felt a shockwave rip down his spine. As the senior evaluator, the responsibility of the destruction of coding machines, crypto gear, intercept systems, and thousands of documents stamped top secret rested on him. He then grabbed a fire axe and started swinging the blade of the nearest console. But while he smashed away at equipment near his station, chaos erupted throughout the cabin. Operators stood frozen, unsure of what to destroy first. Others frantically shoved documents toward the emergency hatch. Meanwhile, Comerford, lost in his own destructive frenzy, never even told the crew they were heading for Hainan instead of ditching at sea. With no one to guide them through protocol, several terrified crew members clutched their life vests, ready to jump into the ocean. Others attacked laptops with hammers, pulverizing screens and keyboards, but leaving the hard drives, containing years of intercepted Chinese communications, all completely intact. Lieutenant Marcia Sonon, also believing they were about to ditch, carefully packed the most sensitive materials, including the Martes laptop, with its complete index of NSA targets, into leather satchels and locked them in a cabinet for safekeeping. Through it all, Osborn's mayday calls to Ling Shui went unanswered by the Chinese controllers. Finally, after a pass over the runway to assess the conditions, Osborn brought the damaged EP-3 in low over Ling Shui. Orange tiled roofs flashed beneath them, palm trees swaying in the tropical breeze. At 9:34 a.m., barely 29 minutes after Wang Wei's fighter had torn their world apart, the aircraft's wheels touched Chinese soil, the first American military aircraft to do so in over 50 years. Osborn worked the brakes carefully, feeling the damaged aircraft pull to one side as it rolled down the runway. Through the cockpit window, he could see a lone ground crewman in sandals casually waving them toward a parking area. Behind him, 24 Americans sat in stunned silence, surrounded by partially destroyed equipment and scattered classified documents. They had survived impossible odds. But their ordeal was just beginning. Within minutes, 24 Chinese military personnel surrounded the aircraft. 6 or 8 carrying AK-47s, held at the ready, but not aimed at the plane. At 9:41 a.m., Comerford managed one final transmission over secure satellite communications, reporting their position to the NSA's operations centers in Hawaii and Maryland. Though orders came back to stay put while Washington evaluated the situation, before passing on details about the crash, the intel, or the crew's status, inexplicably, Osborn shut down the plane, severing their last link to the Western world. Standing in the doorway, sweat already beading on his forehead in the humid air, Osborn spotted a PLA officer near the aircraft and gestured toward the man's cell phone. He needed to contact the NSA, let someone, anyone, know the crew was alive. The officer responded that it wouldn't be necessary. All notifications would be handled by them. The Chinese officers motioned for the crew to disembark, and though Osborn hesitated, he eventually gave the nod to Comerford to lower the ladder. One by one, the Americans filed out, their boots striking the tarmac as armed soldiers looked on. Osborn insisted the aircraft was U.S. property, while an officer smiled and said they would simply be standing guard. From there, the crew was led to a waiting bus, where they were handed bottles of water and unfamiliar cigarettes. Osborn leaned toward Comerford and asked about the classified material, who reassured him everything was fine, apparently unaware of just how inadequate their destructive efforts had been. The Americans were taken to military barracks at Ling Shui, questioned for 2 days, and relocated to Haikou. While their treatment was not harsh, sleep was rare, and the food was too foreign for them to stomach. To pass the time, guards handed them decks of cards and an English-language newspaper. Meanwhile, trying to keep morale up, pilots Honeck and Vigneri performed impressions from TV programs during the meals, the only time all 24 people were together. Over time, some of the guards softened, with one even asking for help translating the lyrics to Hotel California. While the crew played cards and counted the days, Chinese signal specialists were taking advantage of a golden opportunity, the keys to an intact American spy plane. The capture of the Lockheed EP-3 Ares II was a massive intelligence failure for the United States, especially because Lieutenant Sonon had never been informed of the landing decision, leaving nearly all the highly classified communications interception gear, computers, documents, equipment, intact and carefully packed away in cabinets instead of being destroyed or jettisoned. To make matters worse, the aircraft was also loaded with encryption devices, cryptographic keys, and entire codebooks extending weeks into the future. Without a doubt, The most damaging loss was a laptop containing the NSA's master index, essentially a complete list of every Chinese military frequency, radar signature, and communication channel the Americans had been tracking for years. As news of the collision spread, Beijing moved quickly to shape the narrative. Wang Wei, the missing pilot, rather than a victim of rash miscalculation, was highly publicized as a national hero. For days on end, state media ran tributes to his bravery, calling him a model officer, and most importantly, a loyal son of China who had defended its airspace with honor until the very last moment. While the American crew members remained in a simple hotel, Washington and Beijing worked out agreements for their return. Behind closed doors, American officials faced impossible choices. A hardline demand for immediate release could turn the crew into long-term hostages. Economic sanctions would backfire on American businesses. Military escalation over a spy plane was unthinkable. With no alternatives, and the team still in Chinese custody, officials began drafting a formal communication letter that might end the crisis. By then, pressure was mounting from every side. Congress demanded action, the media ran the story 24/7, and Beijing held firm. After days of revision, the final version was approved and transmitted to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. On April 11th, Ambassador Joseph Pruer carried it into a meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Zhaxuan and handed over a carefully worded statement of regret that stopped short of admitting fault. It expressed that the United States was, quote, very sorry for the loss of Wang Wei and, quote, very sorry that the aircraft had entered Chinese airspace without permission. The document also acknowledged that the landing at Lingshui had taken place without verbal clearance. Though Washington insisted it was not an apology per se, but rather an expression of regret, Chinese state media framed it differently, calling it a formal apology. That same day, after 11 days of diplomatic silence, interrogation, and uncertainty, the crew of the EP-3 was finally released. One by one, the crew stepped aboard a waiting U.S. transport, flew out through Guam, and landed in Hawaii to reunite with their loved ones. However, the EP-3 stayed behind, dismantled and under guard. In the aftermath of the 2001 Hainan Island incident, Lieutenant Shane Osborn received the Distinguished Flying Cross for bringing his crew home alive against impossible odds. Wang Wei was declared a martyr in China, posthumously honored as a guardian of territorial airspace and waters. His widow even received a personal letter of condolence from President Bush himself. The EP-3 itself remained on Chinese soil until July, when it was finally dismantled and shipped back to the United States in pieces aboard Russian cargo planes. After repairs at Lockheed Martin and upgrades in Texas, the aircraft eventually returned to service. Adding insult to injury, the U.S. had to pay China $34,567 for the crew's 11 days of so-called hospitality. The crisis, coming just 10 weeks into Bush's presidency, marked his first major foreign policy test. The event dominated headlines for weeks, with Congress screaming for answers and pundits debating whether America had shown weakness or not. But before anything could be decided, when the September 11th attacks happened, the spy plane incident, once the biggest story in the world, vanished from public consciousness almost overnight. Years later, a classified NSA damage assessment would reveal the full scope of the failure. The report concluded the crew had sufficient time to destroy all sensitive materials, but failed due to systemic complacency in training and planning. It pointed directly at NSA leadership, including Director Michael Hayden, noting there was no guidance for what to do if forced to land in hostile territory, and that emergency destruction training was so minimal it became, quote, the primary cause of the compromise. The assessment also criticized Osborn and the signals intelligence officers for their poor performance in safeguarding classified materials. Among the compromised secrets were details of how the NSA tracked Chinese submarines and intercepted their ballistic missile communications, capabilities that China could now counter by changing their methods entirely. For China, those stolen secrets became the foundation of a military transformation that would reshape the Pacific. According to Beijing-based naval expert Li Jie, quote, the 2001 crash taught China a lesson that a strong country cannot rely on a vibrant economy alone, but also needs a strong military. Armed with the intelligence windfall from the captured EP-3, China transformed not just Hainan Island, but the entire South China Sea. Construction crews carved submarine pens deep into Hainan's rock, invisible to American satellites. Artificial islands rose from the Spratlys and Paracels, complete with 10,000-foot runways, surface-to-air missiles, and radar domes. What had been open water became a network of unsinkable aircraft carriers, each bristling with military hardware. In 2019, the Chinese government officially credited Wang Wei's death as the catalyst for their military modernization, finally confirming what American analysts had long suspected. The quiet waters Wang Wei flew over in 2001 are gone. Today, the South China Sea is carved up by competing claims, patrolled by warships, and monitored by satellites. American surveillance planes still fly the same routes. Chinese jets still intercept them. The only difference is scale. More planes, more ships, and many more chances for something to go wrong. And next time, there might not be a safe place to land. Thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring our video. If you want to take back control of your personal data and reduce your exposure to data brokers, visit joindeleteme.com/darkskies and use promo code DARKSKIES for 20% off, or scan the QR code on screen.